Welcome back to the Runaways YouTube channel. It's been quite a long time since we posted any videos. I've been pretty busy with testing for the Pro Tour. Now that the Pro Tour is over, we're going to be looking to make a lot of videos to help you guys level up your gameplay and do well at your RTNs or other events that you might attend. So this is the first video in a series that we're going to do covering all of the decks that did well at the Pro Tour. In case you want to play any of these at your RTN, this is a good primer as to how the deck works and some things that you can tweak. Now, before we dive into Michael Feng's Pro Tour winning Oldhim list, I want to just make an announcement that we are running free coaching streams on our Twitch channel. That's twitch.tv/TCGRunaways. I'll include a link. If you're interested in receiving coaching for game replays, this is a kind of new coaching format that we've seen success in other games. Not necessarily card games, but like other like video games and such, to do VOD reviews basically. If you are interested, I'll include a link to the Google form to submit, and you just got to be present at the stream and join the raffle, and that's all it takes. Everything is free. That being said, donations are appreciated, and I'll also include a link to a donation link. We're going to be working on a subscription format in the future for this kind of stuff, but for the time being, everything is completely even and for everybody who wants to participate. So we're going to go over Michael Feng's Oldhim deck list. Oldhim is a hero that hasn't gone through like a ton of changes since basically they've banned Winter's Wail, in the sense that when Outsiders came out, there weren't a lot of cards that were really great for Oldhim. There's maybe like one or two cards in particular, and we'll talk about that when we go through the list. But pretty much one of the benefits of playing Oldhim is that if you have been playing Oldhim for a while, then you can draw on your experience, which I think is one thing that played a great role in Michael Feng's success at the Pro Tour. One thing that the first thing that we got to look at when we look at any Oldhim list is what equipments they're playing. Now, Oldhim is a hero that plays a lot of equipments. It's not uncommon to see Oldhims running 11, 12 equipments, and it puts like a real constraint on the number of cards that you can play from your sideboard. Now, Michael's looks like is only running 10 equipments, which is actually fairly light. So we'll just go over the choices. The first three, Crater Fist, Crown of Seeds, Findel, Spring Tunic, is pretty standard in all Oldhim lists. Findel, Spring Tunic is just actually ends up being one of the best defensive equipments in conjunction with Crown of Seeds. If you can make the game last longer every 3 turns, you can basically get 1 point of life from the Findel, Spring Tunic in conjunction with Crown of Seeds. Iron Rot Legs is a Michael Feng special. A lot of people like playing Iron Hide Legs in that spot. The difference between Iron Rot Legs and Iron Hide Legs, that Iron Rot Legs is a little bit better against heroes that present a lot of breakpoints, that specifically breakpoints that have on-hit triggers. It was pretty good into Fi initially as like a choice, because it's sometimes difficult to find an extra resource to pay for the Iron Hide Legs, particularly if you're planning to play Stalagmite in these aggro matchups. Now, Michael is submitting a Rampart of the Ram's Head that you can see, but I believe that him playing Iron Raw Legs is an indicator that for a lot of matchups, like Lexi, for example, would prefer to be playing Stalagmite into that matchup. Rampart is most likely there maybe for like Azalea for Dash, where the Rampart can get outsized value compared to playing more of like a tempo game with the Stalagmite on blocks. And around, he's running 2 pieces of Arcane Barrier. This is for Icelander and potentially for Kano. 2 AB plus Stalagmite, and Crown of Seeds is actually pretty good setup into most Icelander builds. Like the most common Icelander builds that play like Scar for Scar, Wounded Bull, etc. Against like an all arcane Icelander build, maybe it's a little bit worse, but not that much worse. But this is one of the choices that you have to make when you are configuring a list for a large event such as the Pro Tour. You have to make some sacrifices. I know that during ProQuest season, for example, Michael was running AB3, but that was when Icelander was like a much larger percentage of the meta share. He's playing Rampart of the Ram's Head. We talked about that. Sledge of Anvilheim is there for a lot of like the slower matchups, and it's like a way for you to accrue value on your tunic when you're not using it for like defensively. Like you can use it offensively by putting the extra resource into Sledge of Anvilheim, and then you get like a +2. So you pitch a blue, spend the tunic, and then you get to attack for 6, as opposed to attacking for 4 with like Titan's Fist. Then we have Stalagmite and Titan's Fist. These are for the more aggressive matchups where you really want to leverage your Stalagmite to block more than 3 health worth of damage incoming so that you can kind of trade effectively. Oldhim is a hero that doesn't really get a ton of value from the cards that he's playing, just because a lot of the Guardian cards aren't really pushed on a value axis, but the equipment suite is definitely an area where Oldhim gets more value compared to the other heroes. All right, so let's just jump right into it. One thing to note is that Michael is playing 40 total blues in his deck. The blue count for Oldhim's, I heard over the weekend some people were playing like as low as like 36 blues. I really think that the standard is around 39 blues in a 60 card configuration. The 40th blue is most relevant when you are playing more than 60 cards. So I want to break up the analysis into 2 sections. We have offensive cards and defensive cards. So first we'll look at defensive cards. This format is quite unique because it's one of the first formats where defensive cards are sometimes much better than their offensive counterparts, and the primary reason for that is because one of the strongest decks in the format, or rather 2 of the strongest decks in the format, are both Ranger decks. So you have Lexi, Livewire, and Azalea. And I think that like the main strength of the Ranger class is that Ranger gets to present a lot of attacks that have on hits. So you have cards like Heat Seeker, Infecting Shot. You have against Oldhim, if the Azalea is playing something like Barb Undertow, you have all of the reloads like Bolt and Shot, that Pathing Helix that can be pretty large on their larger turns. So there's just like a lot of hit triggers that you have to deal with, and usually when that's the case, and the heroes aren't. So in previous formats, we had the aggro decks that were predominant was Phi and BRRR. Now BRRR does have some hit triggers. All of her attacks obviously proc the Embodiment of Earth, which is something that you have to kind of deal with as Oldhim. But Phi, for the most part, most of his stuff is damage, except for, like Snatch, and defense reactions weren't as good at the time. But we're seeing the full 6, 0 for 4 defense reactions, plus Michael is playing 7 staunches, and I think this is just as a result of kind of respecting Azalea, respecting Lexi. These cards are really good in that matchup. One of the things that we also have to look at when we're looking at defensive cards is elemental counts. So Michael's playing 3 earth and 6 ice, kind of hard to find Dell. I think that's mostly just for longer matches, but Earth React is always something that you have to kind of weigh whether or not it's good. It's Earth React right now is good into some decks, like it's really good into Assassins, and it's also pretty good into Azalea, because Azalea sometimes has some anti-defense reaction cards, or sometimes you just don't have the defense reaction in your arsenal. And it can be nice to be able to block an additional 2 from your hand. 6 Ice is a pretty interesting choice. I think that the rationale behind this is that while Ice React isn't particularly strong in the current meta, just because, like, for example, you don't have that many opportunities to Ice React Azalea. Ice Reacting Azuri is also not that good, and also Lexi can usually respond to Ice React by activating Voltaire again. I think the key card here is Channel Lake Frigid, and Channel Lake Frigid is actually quite good into Lexi, and some of the, I guess, like the strongest shutdowns, or like the strongest pivots into Lexi is by taking some damage and then playing a Channel Lake Frigid into like a 4-cost. And so I believe that is the rationale behind including 6 Ice. You could play fewer Ice, more Earths, or you could just be playing more 3-blocks. It's one of the levers that you can kind of move on. Now, to talk about offensive cards, the most important thing to kind of look at when you're looking at offensive cards for Oldhim, there's a couple of different categories. There's 4-cost plays, which is plays that you want to make with your Tunic. There's like 6-cost plays, which typically is good when you have access to basically like a free hand. So the typical play pattern for Oldhim involves you hitting your opponent with like some kind of disruptive attack, like Command and Conquer representing Pummel, or you attack him with like Endless Winter or Choke Slam. And then the opponent has to block more cards than they otherwise normally would have. And then that's when it's really nice to have some follow-up plays that let you play off of like a 3-card hand. So stuff like Glacial Footsteps, Spinal Crush, etc. The other category of offensive cards for Oldhim is Go Again attacks, and Go Again attacks are most important when you're playing the Mirror or into Dromai. So Michael's playing 3 Enlightened Strike, and I think that nowadays, like if you're ever playing a match where the game is going to go like even like a little bit short, I think that Enlightened Strike is like really key for Oldhim, mostly because I mean, like you think of when you play other decks that have a pretty low blue count, one of the worst things that you can do is drawing like a 4-red hand. Oldhim is like kind of a little bit reversed, where most of your cards are blue, so you rarely run into that problem, but it still exists. Like if you've ever felt like you drew like an all blue hand in an aggro deck, it's like pretty much like the same probability for that to happen with Oldhim and an all red hand. So Enlightened Strike is really key when you draw like 2 or 3 reds and you want to find like a way to kind of play or send some of these reds to the bottom. And so I think that having 3 Enlightened Strike is fairly non-negotiable for most Oldhim lists now. It's just like quite a flexible card. It's Go Again in the matchups that you need Go Again, and then also it's like high value in the matchups where you do get to block a lot, or you get to kind of filter through your first cycle. Playing the 4-cost attacks, it's pretty interesting. He's playing 1 Choke Slam and 3 Endless Winters, and also 3 Command and Conquers with 2 Pummels. So Endless Winter, this is like one of the things that you kind of learn as you become more experienced playing Oldhim, is you have to kind of figure out what is like the right attack for the particular meta that you're playing in. And a lot of that has to do with like whether or not the hit effects on your attacks are worthwhile. So when the meta was heavily skewed towards Fi and BRRR, for example, Chokeslam was a much stronger card. Chokeslam is still pretty good into Lexi and Azalea, and so I think even now, if you were to play the full 3 Chokeslam, 3 Endless Winter, it wouldn't be terrible. But Michael wanted to, I guess, find some space for a couple of other cards, and so he's shaving Chokeslams. Endless Winter right now is just so good into Ranger just because of the number of times that they have to activate abilities. So, for example, for an average Azalea turn, Azalea is going to activate Azalea plus potentially Death Dealer. So that's 2 Frostbites that you're going to tax your opponent on. Lexi is going to activate Lexi plus 2 instances of Voltaire at the very least. And so that's like 3 Frostbites that you're going to tax your opponent on. And so the hit effect of Endless Winter is actually quite strong right now. And that's one of the reasons why you would want to be playing 3, even potentially if you don't have like the fuse to support the fuse half of the Endless Winter text. I think just the hit effect on its own is quite good. Command and Conquer Pommel is kind of like a mainstay of Oldhim and is one of the strongest plays that you can be making. So no surprise there. There's a lot of heroes that currently are leveraging the Arsenal slot, and so it's just one of the best things that you can do. Now, let's take a look at the more expensive attacks that Michael is choosing to run. So he's choosing to run 3 Glacial Footsteps and 3 Spinal Crush and 1 Pulverize. Now, I think that Michael playing 3 Glacial Footsteps is also kind of like a motivator for him to play 6 ice cards. Glacial Footsteps Fused is not always the most relevant in a lot of matchups, but in the matchups where it is relevant, it's quite good. So the matchups that Glacial Fused is pretty good in, I would say it's pretty good in the Oldhim mirror as a way to kind of deny value. So a lot of times when you if you do get like a free turn and you end up throwing this like 6 for 10, one of the worst things that your opponent can really do is just like block 3 cards and then use their tunic counter to attack like Sledge for 6 or something, and it kind of like blanks out a lot of the value that you're kind of hoping to gain by swinging like a big attack. And so in instances like that, let's say if you have the open Arsenal slot, like fusing an ice card kind of denies that and puts pressure on your opponent to have a either a defense reaction or like a similarly good like aggressive hand to kind of come back at you. And into Icelander, having Dominate is one of like the key ways to attack that matchup. And so that's something to consider. Michael's also playing 3 Spinal Crush, and Spinal Crush is currently in a interesting spot. So Spinal Crush is really good, or rather Spinal Crush is at its best when the aggro decks that you want to attack have a lot of 2 blocks. And Lexi is quite an interesting aggro deck because Lexi doesn't have good armor, but Lexi does play a lot of 3 blocks because almost the entire Lexi deck is arrows, and all the arrows block 3. One of the kind of worst plays that can happen is you attack with Spinal Crush, taking damage, and then the Lexi blocks 2 arrows and plays 3 of a kind. That being said, one thing that is quite important to keep in mind when you're building your deck out is having balance in your plays. And while it is true that taking damage to play Spinal Crush isn't that good into Lexi, it is quite good into Azalea because of the number of 2 blocks that Azalea runs. It's also, pretty good into BRRR and Fi. There are still some people playing those decks. But you really do need attacks that you can play after you take your pivot turn. So, for example, you have been blocking for quite a long time. you have your tunic up, and then you play Endless Winter. So the Lexi player blocks, let's say, like 2 or 3 cards. They come back at you, not that strong, and you get like a 3 or 4 card hand. You really do want your 3 card hand to be pretty good, and so attacking with Spinal Crush, attacking with Glacial Footsteps in those situations is pretty good. One of Pulverize, I actually find that in the Guardian Mirrors now, it used to be that you would run like 2 or 3 Pulverize, but I find that in the Guardian Mirrors now it's not as important. Michael's actually not playing one of the tech choices for Oldhim, which is to play Vambrace plus Anothos. And so I think that Vambrace is like one of the one of the only cards that is really good in Oldhim post Outsiders, but it's really only good for the Oldhim Mirror as a way to like deny Crown of Seeds or 3-act some of the defensive cards like Oasis or Peace of Mind. And so, you know, the games end up being like quite a bit shorter, and so it can be like a little bit awkward to try to hit Pulverize. If you do the math, usually it's like if you have the Pulverize set in your arsenal and your tunic is going to hit 3, then it's only about, I think, a little bit over like 50-50 shot to hit to be able to play the Pulverize on the following turn, and then if you like wait another turn, it's like another like 50%. So it's actually pretty awkward to play Pulverize on first cycle, and so I mean that's something to keep in mind. As far as again attacks go, Michael is playing the full 3 Rouse the Ancients, Zealous Belting plus the 3 E-Strikes. And so you can play more Zealous Beltings if you want, but you're gonna have to cut into your defense reactions. The rest of the deck is, I think, pretty standard. Tear Asunder at 3 actually is worth noting. Tear Asunder is quite good into Lexi as kind of just like a 3 card play, because Lexi doesn't play armor, and so just like in general when you are building Oldhim decks, something to keep in mind is Tear Asunder gets much better the less armor the decks you want to play it against are. The rest of the blues are fairly standard. You just like play the attacks that have like the highest power. This is mostly to enable Rouse the Ancients, so you see that Michael's playing all of the 8 power blues. He's playing Cranial, Macho, Thunderquake, Glacial Footsteps blue, so no surprise there. Plays Disable because, you know, it's the second biggest thing that you can be playing, and then also is playing Debilitate and Choke Slams. Similar reason, these are poppers against Dromai, and then also can be used to, you know, give Zealous Belting go again. 2 pummels instead of 3 is, I think, probably a concession to the fact that pummels are like very awkward when you draw them in multiples, particularly into Rangers, and so you only like really need like 1 big pummel play. I think like you only need to pummel the Command and Conquer once against a Ranger opponent to really win the game, and so I think that's part of the reason why he's only playing 2. And that's pretty much the deck. Wanted to talk real quick about kind of like what the matchups should look like, and then we'll talk about potential ways that you can sideboard this deck. So if you're playing, the first thing that you should do when you're identifying like how the matchup goes is you're identifying whether or not a matchup is going to be like a Titan's Fist plus Shield matchup, or if it's going to be a Sledge matchup. And so I think that Oldhim is pretty favored in all the matchups that he would play Sledge. So these are all the slower matchups, like the Mirror into Bravo. I think you can play Sledge. You can play it into Azuri. You can play Sledge. And so like all of these matchups where you can like take the game like a little bit slower, usually Oldhim is pretty favored, and the way that you want to be playing those matchups is by kind of capitalizing on activating your tunic for value as many times as possible. It's just like one advantage that your deck has over the other decks. Now, the Titan's Fist matchups are like a little bit tougher because you do need to find like good spots to block and to pivot accordingly. And as I would say that Oldhim is probably quite favored into Azalea, but into Lexi, it's like a little bit, I guess like even to slightly losing. And you also play Titan's Fist currently, I think, into Dromai. Although into Dromai, you kind of do take like a more aggressive slant, and part of the reason why you are playing Titan's Fist is because it's just like an easier way for you to clear auras and some of the dragons that matter, like Mirror Guy. And you can actually see Michael, there's videos of him playing against two Dromais, and his, I think, overall game plan into both Dromais ends up being pretty different, just due to kind of like the game situation as well as their respective builds. So I think it's good to kind of watch the replays for both his semifinals and finals match to kind of get a sense of how the Oldhim should be playing into that matchup. And so overall, I think like Oldhim's matchup spreads are pretty favorable. You just have to kind of know how to play all of the different matchups, and that comes kind of with experience. So let's make a copy of this, and I'll show you guys how I would sideboard into the various decks. So I think like the first card that you can immediately begin kind of deciding to cut is Red Staunch. So Red Staunch is a card that's quite strong when it is strong, and when it's not strong, it is pretty bad. So let's board for matchups where the Red Staunch isn't maybe as good. So into like I would say like Lexi, into like Icelander. You want to, let's say you do like a more aggressive slant for your build. I would probably board out Heart of Findel. And then if you wanted to play like lean 60, I would look to see maybe you would be cutting, let's see, you would probably want to shave maybe like one defense reaction, and then you could cut your pulverize and play something like this. If you wanted to take like a more aggressive approach, you can even take out like the Fate for Scenes altogether and play the Glacials. And this is like primarily for matchups that you want to be attacking a lot, stuff like Icelander. So like obviously for like those, let's say like if we're playing to Icelander, then I would play these equipments. So I play AB2. I would play Stalagmite, Titan's Fist. Actually, all the defense reactions go out. And I'll probably run something like this. This is the 60 that I would run. If you are playing to Lexi, so Lexi is also like a Stalagmite matchup. You can play your Sink Belows. They're quite good. I think that you can cut Zealous Belting, and you could cut, maybe shave like one. If you wanted to play like a more aggressive stance into Lexi, it would be something like this. You could like slot in like one or two more Fate for Scenes. For some of these cards, depending, like you could shave an E-Strike, play two E-Strikes, and then play like an additional Fate for Scene. Like you're going to be doing a lot of blocking, so like the flexibility of E-Strike isn't necessarily as good. Might run something like this. You play 2 E-strikes, 2 favor scenes, and like the overall game plan is to try to find like a pivot turn with your Endless Winter or your Chokeslam or your Command and Conquer on a Tunic, and then hit them with Glacial Footsteps, Spinal Crush to get them low enough where they have to start blocking. And I think a mistake that a lot of Oldhims make when it comes to playing against these aggro decks that have setup potential is to try to play too defensively. Like, you really do need to try to find your pivot turns. Another good tip into when you're playing Oldhim into Lexi is trying to get like a lot of value out of your Stalagmite. So if you've either played against Lexi a lot or you have played Lexi a lot, you know that one of the worst things that Lexi can get when they're playing into Oldhim is kind of like 4 red hands. And this happens because they're usually going to submit, like, if not their whole deck, like a lot of their deck, and their ratios get messed up a little bit. So I think anytime that you see the Lexi pitch a red card to load Voltaire or something like that, it's maybe like a good indicator, hey, it's like time to pivot. You block with Stalagmite, maybe the Frostbite will eat a card by itself, and then you can start using your attacks. The last matchup, or not the last matchup, let's sideboard for like Azalea. So against Azalea, I think all of the defense reactions probably come in. You really, all of the 4 costs are pretty good, and Spinal is also pretty good. And I think your primary game plan into Azalea actually is trying to fatigue them. Just because they don't present, so most of the Azalea damage is coming from their hit triggers, and so stuff like Lace with Blood Rot, if you do block it out, is only like worth like 3 on a card, whereas the main difference between Azalea and Lexi is that Lexi plays a lot more for like setup plays than Lexi does, than Azalea does. So like, you don't necessarily even need to play like all your pummels into Azalea. It's much more important that you have like good defenses set up. Like, if I was playing Michael's deck against an Azalea, I might run something like this, where you play all your defense reactions, maybe just have the 1 pummel for like, Command and Conquer or Spinal Crush at a key moment, and then I would be playing like this kind of equipment suite with the Rampart of the Ram's Head, and like just really trying to get the most value. Like, you can pitch a blue, play a Staunch, block with your Rampart, Earth React when necessary, and like really only attacking when you get to attack for free. One of the things that I think when you are playing defensively that can trip up a lot of people who are learning to play Oldhim for the first time is that sometimes it's actually like, when you have 1 card left, let's say this is a situation that comes up quite frequently, you have blocked, let's say, like 3 cards, you have 1 card left, and it's a blue that you can attack Winter's Wail with. It's just going to be better for you to arsenal that card and like keep playing defensively. And this, when Winter's Wail was a thing, it was like oftentimes better to just like swing the Winter's Wail, particularly if it was like with a Frostbite. But I think without Frostbite, with Titan's Fists, a lot of the plays, it's just going to be better to just like keep setting up your defenses, and you're going to end up kind of fatiguing out the opponent if you play in that way. Now, against setup decks, that's not always the best way to play, and you do need to like put the pressure on, but in our current setup right now with all the defense reactions, that's how we're going to be playing defensively. Now let's board for a matchup like Azuria, where we're going to be playing Sledge. So I think that you can like take it a couple different ways. The biggest question mark for me when you're playing into a deck like Azuri is like whether or not you play your red staunches, and I find that staunch is actually like quite awkward a lot of times into decks like that. Now staunch is obviously like really good when the Azuri is going to be trying to use her hero ability, but like if they're just playing like contract cards, it's not that good. So I could see like playing maybe like 1 or 2 staunches. The other thing that you want to kind of keep in mind when you're playing into these decks that do play a lot of 3 blocks is whether or not cards like Spinal Crush are gonna end up being good. So Spinal Crush is oftentimes just like a block card in these matchups, so it can actually be beneficial. Like if I knew that my opponent was playing like, you know, the more aggressive builds of Azuri that play like, you know, like Nimbleism, Ravenous Rabble, etc., then maybe Spinal Crush is like a little bit better. But oftentimes if I had Spinal Crush into it, like I would just like want to play like a more like slow game plan, a little bit more defensive into Azuri, and so I like don't really want to have a card like Spinal Crush to kind of mess up my ratios. And also you like don't need Chokeslam, so it's not too bad to submit like, you know, 63 cards. You could like add in, you know, 1 or 2 like a staunch response or like a spinal or something if you felt like you wanted the extra cards. But this is kind of like the type of setup that I would play into, you know, like a slower matchup where I would want to be playing Sledge of Anvilheim. And you really just want to try to leverage like your big turns, like you go like Zealous Pitch, 2 blues, play Zealous Belting, Sledge of Anvilheim, or like you are blocking a lot and then you just try to use your Tunic with your Sledge of Anvilheim. That's really like what your primary game plan is. And then because all of your attacks attack for such high power relative to their attacks, and your weapon also attacks for more damage than their weapon, you're just like naturally going to be winning like the fatigue. I hate to say like it's like a fatigue matchup, but like you're just going to be like winning like the overall card race against decks like Azuri if you do this. Last thing is to board for the mirror. So I know that Michael is the type of player who really likes playing like basically his whole deck into Oldhim. There's a couple of different ways that you can play this. So I mentioned before that one of the things that Michael's not playing is Anathos. So Anathos Vambrace is actually like a cool combo that you can play if you want to play like a much more like aggressive stance for playing the mirror. But like I think if you want to play like the Pro Tour champ, probably is going to be like submitting your whole deck, and the name of the game is value, so you really just want to be trying to like accrue value whenever possible. Tunic plus Sledge is like one of the best things that you can do when your opponent, or like if you do like Crown Seeds. So Crown Seeds plus Staunch Response from your hand, that's a 2-card 8. You just want to find these like little like combos in the Oldhim mirror. And I think that the last tip that I have for the Oldhim mirror is that might separate you from just like a pretty decent Oldhim to being like a really good Oldhim, is to find ways to creatively deny your opponent the Tunic value, or to deny your opponent like, you know, Crown Seeds value. And that's like where your ice reacts are going to come into play. So things like if your opponent plays Rouse the Ancients and they have, you know, 1 card left in their hand, they want to be swinging their weapon afterwards with their Tunic or something, and then you ice react them, and then they can't swing their weapon. Things like doing ice react to deny your opponent an arsenal card when their Tunic is on 3, so they can't use their Tunic to crown. You know, just like these types of little micro plays, while it doesn't seem like the advantage that you gain is that large, really is the kind of breaking point for playing Oldhim mirrors, because the Oldhim mirrors go so long that actually the heuristic for who's going to end up winning the Oldhim mirror is probably going to be the person who activates Findle Spring Tunic the most, because if like your game goes for like 21 turns and you get like 7 points out of it, you get 7 points, your opponent gets like 5 or 6 points. That's like a 2-point swing, and having like a 2-point swing in the Oldhim mirror is actually quite a big like game changer. And yeah, so like that's pretty much it. There's a couple of levers that you can tweak to kind of make your Oldhim deck tailored for, you know, like your local meta. You can play like more copies of Zealous Belting. You can play Anathos, Vambrace if you want. You can play less Null Rune. You can play more Null Rune if your local community has a lot of like wizard players. If your local community has a lot of wizard players, then maybe you want to play less staunches. Maybe you want to play like 1 or 2 Oaken Olds. And so these are all things that you can do to kind of tailor this Pro Tour winning deck to you know, the tournaments that you're going to be entering. So I hope that this breakdown was useful. Leave a comment if you found it helpful, or if you think that there's anything that was missing that you want to see, and then we'll you know, improve for the next deck tech or deck breakdown that we do. So thank you so much for watching the video. Make sure that you tune into the coaching streams, and if you feel like you want to support in other ways, I'll include a donation link also in the description. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys on the next one.